marching on the United States Congress to launch our summer initiative to continue to push to mobilize these 15 million poor and low-income voters, low-income, low-wage workers. It is time for a resurrection and not an insurrection. And we this year are in the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer. But freedom and justice is that much which you must continue to fight for. I'm going to say a little bit more, but we want to introduce this first by way of our promo video that the whole nation might see and might join in with us. And so at this time, the promo video. Ms. Jackson. You're fine. Is it up?
To pay my bills since I've been working at 16 years old. I work full-time 64 hours a week, 7 days a week. I am exhausted.
Our government finds it necessary to ban abortion, to say that they are saving our children. But more children die as a result of poverty in this country.
We should not be cornered and forced to choose one necessity over another.
This is the consequences that we face. So what our people say is that we are fighting the oldest evil.
No matter how you call the holy, all of our sacred texts compel us to create a world in which there is enough for us all.
In the face of a distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism, we declare that silence is betrayal.
We gather on these streets in the spirit of the prophet Amos, who declared, "Hate evil and love good and establish justice."
We heed the charge from the Holy Quran. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qist. O you who have believed, be persistent, standing firm in justice, witnesses for God.
Hope comes from the bottom, from those most directly impacted by the profound evils of America.
Our votes are not a show of support. They are a demand.
We will raise our cry and we will call for change because nothing less would be a betrayal of our sacred commitment.
We are here. We are the poor and dispossessed, and we are here.
Until children are protected, sick folk are healed, low-wage workers are paid, immigrants are treated fairly, affordable houses are provided, until saving the world and diplomacy and living in peace is more important than blowing up the world. We won't be silent anymore. If we've got to march, we'll march. If we've got to engage in nonviolent direct action, we'll engage. If we have to ask workers to make election day a labor strike day, we'll do it. But until then, we won't be silent or unseen or unheard anymore. Forward together. We must engage poor and low wealth people to change the political landscape. I want to talk about the power of poor and low income, low wage voters in this country. For far too long, extremists have blamed poor people and low wage people for their plight, while moderates too often have ignored poor people, appealing instead to the so-called middle class. Meanwhile, poor and low income, low wage people have become nearly half of this country, and we are here today to make one thing clear. Poor and low-wage brothers and sisters have the power to determine and decide the 2024 elections and elections beyond. During the 2016 election, there were 34 million poor and low-wealth people who were eligible to vote but didn't. These voters make up more than a quarter of the entire electorate. In our study that was done, Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low-Income Americans in 2020 by Robert Paul Hartley, Assistant Professor of Social Work at Columbia University, along with Charlie Gupta Barnes, we found that a major reason poor and low-income people aren't voting is because political campaigns do not talk to them, do not speak to their issues. We found out that in our election cycle, sometimes we have 15, 20 debates for president, and not one of those debates, not 15 minutes, not 30 minutes, not 10 minutes is even given to raising questions about how the policies of that particular party or politician will impact nearly 50% of the electorate in this country and of the citizenship. Most Americans recognize we need a third Reconstruction. And the only way we're going to do it is by changing the political landscape. And the only way we're going to do it is by mobilizing poor and low-income, low-wage voters. Poverty is now the fourth leading cause of death in America, a moral crisis, taking the lives of 800 people every day. And this is before COVID and after COVID. We can no longer accept that over 135 million of our neighbors are poor and low wealth in this country. And while they are disproportionately percentage-wise black, 55% or 22 million plus people, the hard truth also is that the large majority, nearly 60 million, are our white brothers and sisters as well. We must address these issues. These are not marginal issues. These are issues that must be at the center of the narrative of a democracy in our country if we're serious about saving the democracy. Saving the democracy cannot just be some philosophical term. Saving the democracy must be a third Reconstruction where people are paid a living wage, where people have health care, where public education is fully funded, and where voting rights are protected and expanded. The hard truth is, in 2021, 8 so-called moderate Democratic U.S. Senators, Tom Tester, Joe Manchin, Jean Shaheen, Christine Sinema, Agnes King, Tom Carper, Chris Coons, and Magdalene Hassan, voted with the extremists in the Senate, Republicans, against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. $15 an hour, which was called for in 1963 at the March on Washington when they wanted to increase the minimum wage by 75% to $2. We're 60 years behind. And the minimum wage has not been raised since 2009. Workers are working hard and producing more. Many of them were essential workers, but they feel like they are being treated as though they're expendable. And so these poor and low-wage workers are saying it's time for us to mobilize. That is why we are launching this campaign on March the 2nd, 42 weeks to mobilize 15 million poor and low-wage workers who have been infrequent voters. We are saying it's time to be infrequent no more. According to the exit polls, 72% of Americans say they would prefer a government-run health care plan. Over 70% of Americans support raising the minimum wage, including 62% of Republicans. In Florida, the $15 an hour minimum wage referendum got more votes than either presidential candidate. We declare today that poor and low-wage voters coming together with religious leaders and moral advocates to say our votes are demands, not merely votes for personalities, but votes for policy. Votes are demands. And if persons want these votes, then talk to this block of voters like you have never talked to them before. We must wake up this sleeping giant. Our campaign will educate, mobilize, and organize. We've been working since 2018, building a movement in more than 42 states, and now around this country on March the 2nd, in 30 states, Alabama, Arizona, California, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Maryland, Maine, Michigan, Missouri, Mississippi, North Carolina, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, Washington State, Washington, D.C., West Virginia, and Wisconsin. We will be mobilizing for 42 straight weeks. And then in Washington, D.C. on June the 15th. We are not an insurrection, but you better believe we are a resurrection of justice and love and righteousness, and it is time for us to come together. And if you want to know even more, those of you that are listening, what the power really is, for instance, when the margin of victory was near or less than 3%, low-income voters accounted for 34 to 45% of the voting population. In Arizona, 39%. In Georgia, 37%. In Michigan, 37%. In Nevada, 36%. In North Carolina, 43%. In Pennsylvania, 34%. In Wisconsin, where Liis is from, 39%. It is political suicide not to care about this block of voters. When you look at the fact that across this country, poor and low-wealth voters, there's not a state where low-income, low-wage, poor and low-wealth voters do not make up at least 20% of the electorate. Finally, hear these numbers. In Michigan, in 2016, the margin of victory in the presidential election was 10,000 votes. In 2016, 980,000 poor and low-wage eligible voters did not vote. It would only take 1.1% of that percentage of low-wage voters, non-voters, to overcome that margin of victory in 2016. In North Carolina, the margin of victory for presidents was 170,000 votes. In 2016, 920,000 poor and low-wage eligible voters did not vote. It would only take 18.9% of low-income, low-wage non-voters to match or succeed the margin of voters in that state. We have power. We've got to use it, and the time is now to build the third Reconstruction and be a resurrection of power in this moment. There is no turning back. March the 2nd, we mobilize for 42 straight weeks to shift the political electorate in this country. At this time, I want to invite the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, Reverend Dr. Liis Theoharis, to come, and then following her, one of our great pollsters in this country, Celinda Lake, will come and talk as well, and to make very clear why this is a critical issue that people seeking elected office and change cannot, and must not ignore.
We know from the experience of leaders in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, that economic justice and saving this democracy are deeply connected. In this rich nation that has the wherewithal to end poverty tomorrow, where there's the political will, we must not overlook the voices and votes of poor and low-income people. And as we have said and will continue to say, we are mobilizing and organizing, registering and educating people for a movement that votes for health care and debt cancellation, votes for living wages and strong anti-poverty programs, votes for fair taxes and the demilitarization of our communities and world, votes for immigrant rights, and more. Since the last presidential election, there have been at least 1,000 voter suppression bills introduced across this country. This attack on our democracy and on our voting rights impacts poor and low-income people the most, both in whose votes are most suppressed and in what happens when extremists get into office and pass policies that hurt the poor and vulnerable the most. I know this connection between the attack on our democracy and poverty from my home state in Wisconsin, a battleground state in this election, home to 1.9 million poor and low-income eligible voters, or as we heard, 39% of the electorate. But between 2020 and 2023, Wisconsin lawmakers have introduced 46 voter restrictive bills. And at that same time, 1.1 million children received the expanded child tax credit, 320,000 low-wage workers received an earned income tax credit. But since these pandemic programs have expired, poverty is on the rise. And it doesn't have to be this way. Or in Pennsylvania, where I personally experienced homelessness and got involved in organizing, where Pennsylvania is home to 3.3 million poor and low-income eligible voters, who are 30% of the electorate. Where between 2020 and 2023, Pennsylvania state lawmakers introduced 41 voter restrictive bills, and now 679,500 people, almost 700,000 people, are expected to have lost Medicaid by next month due to the end of these pandemic policies. If we are going to be serious about addressing the problems of low wages, the lack of health care, inadequate housing, attacks on education, and more in this impoverished democracy, we as a nation must listen to the demands of the poor who are dying from policy violence, who are calling for the expansion of voting rights, not the suppression of our votes and our voices, and who are pushing and will continue to push political candidates and elected leaders to lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise. People are dying, but we know it doesn't have to be this way. And so we are calling on everyone to join us in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, and join us in these 42 weeks of mobilizing and organizing, because we're going to get it done.
It is so critical in this moment that we dispel so many distortions. Poor and low wealth white people vote against their own interests. Poor and low wealth, low wage folk don't have power. The margins, they really can't make a difference. People are only not voting because of voter suppression. No, the number one reason is people are not voting because nobody talks to them. That's what our research has found. We can't change this. Yes, we can. One jobs report means you should just be quiet because everything is getting better. A job report is a snapshot in time. It is not talking about the systemic change that must take place. Even if you have wages that go up a little bit in a period of time, that still does not change the law that makes the minimum wage $7.25. And for people who are in the restaurant industry, $2.13 plus tips. It does not change the fact that folk are dying at 800 people a day from poverty. 350,000 people died during COVID from the lack of health care. Now, as the Linda comes, it is important that you know when we march on these state capitals, why are we marching on state capitals? Because that's where so much of the current day political insurrection is going on, in state capitals. And when we march on these state capitals, each of these marches will also include meeting with both sides of the aisle, taking our demands and policies to every politician inside of those state assemblies, and demanding those state assemblies to do what they can do. State assemblies have something to say when it comes to voting rights in that state, when it comes to living wages in that state, when it comes to funding public education in that state, when it comes to health care in that state. And so our issues on the flyer are very specific to what state assemblies can do. Now, when we come in June 15th to the Congress, we'll be focused on what the Congress can do, but we're focused now on what state assemblies can do. And in a little bit, I'm going to introduce you who's going to be our co-chair for strategy and mobilization for June 15th. But right now, we want to focus. So Lynn, we talked the other day, and you said this is right. As a major pollster who does this work all the time, come and talk to the American people and our constituents about why this group, this powerful block of voters, over 80 plus million people now, cannot, must not, should not be ignored.
Well, it is a great honor and very humbling to be here, and I picked the sign that speaks to my expertise, which is voters. You know, it's not the polling data that should drive this campaign. It's obviously the moral authority and the need. But in this case, the right thing to do is also the smart thing to do. In 2024, the election is going to be about mobilization. There's no question that the biggest contest between the two parties is going to be who can get their voters out to vote. Democrats have an enthusiasm gap today, and we have fissures. The Progressive Alliance and the Democrats have fissures within their constituency that makes getting out the vote even more important. The biggest block of potential voters by far is low-income, low-wage voters. Increased participation by even minuscule percentages, as both of the ministers before me have been very good pollsters actually and giving good numbers, minuscule changes could be game-changing in terms of the margins. It is a massive voter engagement that is unprecedented that's being started here today. And what I say as a practitioner is it combines the essential elements of getting out there early. We're not coming in on October 31st and say, oh God, save the nation. We are grassroots engagement, charismatic national leaders, which you see, and powerful local leaders, which you see on the board, and a powerful agenda. And this is an agenda, again, that is not controversial with the public. Democrats, independents, and Republicans support this agenda, whether it's child tax credit, raising the wages, one fair wage, again, a Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is wildly popular with the voters. They don't know they're supposed to be against it. They're wildly in favor of it. But let's go to the politics here. And you heard these numbers already, but let me just share a couple with you. Where the margin of victory was less than 3%, and where it is projected to be less than 3% in 2024, 30 to 45% of the voters are low-wage voters or low-income families. Reverend Barbara gave you these numbers already, but just a couple. In Arizona, 40% of the voters low wage. The percentage of victory was 0.03%. Georgia, 38% of the voters. 0.2%, Michigan 39%, and the numbers could go on and on. The turnout among low-wage workers today and low-income voters is on average, and Dr. Hartley has done a magnificent report here, 20 to 22% below the average turnout. This is a huge block of voters, and it is a block of voters that votes 58 to 60% at minimum progressive, no matter how conservative the state. So whether you're talking about Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, you're talking about a huge number, game-changing number of voters. So the question is, what I love about polling is that conventional wisdom is about 95% wrong, plus or minus 5%. And Beltway conventional wisdom is wrong about 100% of the time, plus or minus 5%. So as Reverend Barbara said, this can't be done, it won't make any difference, really. Well, in Georgia, 39,000 non-voters were gotten out to vote between 2016 and 2020, and that was 3 times the margin of victory. And just to give you, to end on a note of a little of the difference here, and you don't have to be very good at math to realize these numbers are astounding, because a lot of Americans not too good at math, but even everyone gets this ratio. In Arizona, there are more than 280,000 projected non-voters in low-income households. The margin of victory was 10,000 votes. In Georgia, 500,000. Even with all the mobilization, the margin of victory was under 12,000 votes. In North Carolina, we lost by 74,000 votes, 480,000 low-income families projected not to vote in 2024. And finally, Wisconsin, in honor of your home state, 240,000 low-income families projected not to vote. The margin of victory was 21,000. Again, this campaign is a great honor to be part of because it's the right thing to do, but you'd have to be a moron not to participate in this, and most elected officials are not complete morons. So thank you for your time. Thank you so much for your leadership. And
thank you, Celine. Thank you so much. That's exactly right. These are serious numbers. You know, we've been spending a retreat this week in my home state in a tier 1 county, the poorest of counties, and I get so tired of people writing off those counties and not recognizing. I've been poor all my life. I didn't have to take it up. It was born in it, but people have been writing it off. The very place where just a little bit of change could fundamentally shift the power of the state. Let me recognize Ross Pellis, our senior advisor to the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, who's in the room. And let me recognize Ms. Dorothy Jackson, who's going to be working with us as the Executive Director of Strategy as we move toward June 15th. These numbers are serious. And so we don't have to just die, poor and low-wage folk. We can come alive. We can come alive and shift this democracy. And for those listening, we're not just starting this year. We've already tested this in 2016, 2020. We took about 400 people, trained and touched over 2 million voters in 7 states, and we have the metrics. If you pull out, for instance, the number of people we touched in Georgia and helped get to the polls, our touch was over 3,000. And Shali's going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to ask Attorney Shali Gupta-Barnes and Reverend Casimir Brown, who's also an economist policy. They're going to each take about 1.5 minutes on a particular piece, and then we're going straight to the power brokers, really, of this movement, which are poor and low wage. And they don't mind me saying that, because if you don't say it, nobody will ever pay attention to you. You got to say it to make them pay attention. Reverend Cass, Attorney General.
Good morning. So I wanted to share a few more numbers about Georgia, which we've heard already, as an example of the kind of power, again, that poor and low-income voters have unleashed and will continue to build and unleash towards 2024, towards the elections this year. There are about 2.4 million poor and low-income voters in Georgia. And in 2020, just half of them, a little bit more than half, cast their votes. And they still accounted for nearly 1/4 of all the votes cast in that election. Okay, that's a huge segment of the vote share, and it was still just half, it was just half of that block of voters. And yet most voting drives don't pay any attention to poor and low-income voters because the conventional wisdom, which is not very wise, is that poor and low-income people don't care about politics, elections, or voting, which just isn't true. So in 2020, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, deliberately targeted this segment of voters in several states. And in Georgia, as we've heard, our outreach helped bring 39,000 of those eligible non-voters who hadn't participated in 2016, but chose to participate in 2020. They brought them, our reach was part of the effort that brought them into the voting electorate. And that was three times greater than the margin of victory in that state. And we went back in 2020, reaching out to every low-income voter in Georgia, who we know, we've seen it in 2020, we saw it in 2022, we will see it again in 2024, not only in Georgia, but across the country, that these voters can be organized to take action together around an agenda that speaks to their needs. And that agenda, as we've heard, not only must be pro-poor, that it has to confront systemic poverty, it has to confront systemic racism, it has to confront ecological devastation, it has to confront the denial of health care and programs that are life-saving, it has to confront rampant militarism and a war economy, all of which harm the poor first and worst. Alongside those 2.4 million people in Georgia, those 2.4 million poor and low-income voters, there are another 80 million of these voters across the country who are part of a population of 140 million people who need to see this agenda carried forward. It is time our political system started taking these voters and these people seriously.
We've been hearing a lot about the facts and the figures, but let's be very clear. We are in a moral crisis right now. We're in a moral crisis in this country that has been festering because of these systemic injustices that we have heard do not have to be this way. It is a policy choice. We are in a moral crisis when we have poverty being the fourth leading cause of death in this country. We are in a moral crisis when we have 52 million people earning less than $15 an hour. We are in a moral crisis when we have 46 million people who don't even have access to safe drinking water. We are in a moral crisis, but we have the power. We have the power across this country to turn every election around. We have a power in this country because just in 2016, we saw that over a third of the states, the margin of victory for over a third of the states were less than 100,000 voters. We have the power, and we're going to show them our power, not just on March 2nd, on June 15th, and definitely at the polls. We have the power, and we're going to be making it known that these elections, they're going to be one step, but we know that it's the first step on a long road to change every single one of those policies so all can move forward together.
One step back. I think it's very clear why politicians running need to talk to these voters. Our votes are not about personality, they're about demands. Your conventions need to talk to these voters while we're doing all this before the convention. If you want these voters, talk to them because they have the power. When we keep talking about saving the democracy, here's the power. And so to talk about that, we have some people coming now who represent that power. And I asked them to stand together. Matt Rosen, keep me on time. I know we have a Rosen, Veronica Burton from Wisconsin, Matt Rosen from Pennsylvania, Janice Guzman from Massachusetts, Mike Pusar from Maryland, Linda Burns from Alabama, and we also have on Zoom out of North Carolina, Aandra Armstrong, am I right? Georgia, out of Georgia, all right? You all come around the podium at this time. Come on.
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Rosen. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am part of the Poor People's Campaign, and I'm currently on SSI. And this all started because of mental health issues. I was denied treatment for years. I was looked at as a criminal and not as someone with healthcare needs. It took 20 years of not fitting into this society to receive the mental health care that I needed. I'm a convicted felon. I served 9 years altogether in prison. I was told by correctional officers that I was not allowed to vote. I assumed they were right. I never looked into it. I was 40 years old when my wife finally told me that I actually did have the right to vote. I'm tired of companies and billionaires buying these politicians and driving workers deeper into poverty and debt. The daily toll of thankless minimum wage retail jobs and backbreaking construction jobs that I have worked. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, there are 19 billionaires that have a $92 billion altogether. And under our flat tax, they say they pay the same taxes that I do. Right now, because of my criminal record and the amount of money we have to fork out for a car that still won't run, my wife and I are struggling to find a place to call home. We are currently living in a house with a friend. We just want something simple. We just want a roof over our head. That's right. The basic right to human housing. There are many like us, like my wife, crying out in the wilderness. We must come across all lines of division and make the demand to put people first. People over profits and gain, life over death, and that our voices be heard by our state representatives to do the jobs that they were elected to do.
And I heard that you're gonna be mobilized.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah.
I heard. You all come on over together and stand around together. Come on. That's right. So there you go.
Hello everyone, my name is Linda Burns and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I've been on this road a long time. I am one in 1.9 million Americans living in or emergency away from property. Okay. For 3 years, I worked the assembly line at Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama.
That's right.
The work was grueling. We were expected to work like robots, moving like 1,000 pieces an hour. You was risk getting rolled up or fired. I got badly injured. My left arm, I had 2 surgeries. I had to get a 3rd surgery, but I didn't have no more insurance. Amazon, they cut my insurance off a year after. They let me go last month in October. During COVID. I was there from the beginning, from 2020 up until last year in October. I couldn't afford to get the necessary 3rd injury because no insurance. They cut my hours. I was only making $180 a week. $180 a week. I couldn't afford to take my kids out for a decent meal. It was very heartbreaking. Amazon let me go because I was helping organize the union. We didn't get the union in Alabama, but I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to stand in solidarity. That's right. Organizing the union showed me how many people were in the same situation I was. Not just in Alabama, but all over the world. That's right. The minimum wage in Alabama is at an all-time low of $7.25. Now I work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week as a caregiver. I work too hard to have nothing. 47% of the voters are poor or low wage. Getting that vote in is very important.
That's right.
We cannot settle for less. We got to stand up for our right. We are forward together, not one step back.
And I heard you're going to be organized.
I am, yes.
We were proud to stand with you in that fight in Bessemer. And we're going to win. We're going to win.
We're going to win.
All right. Thank you so much. Come on over, y'all. Come on over.
In the state of Maryland, between 2018 and 2020, there were 2.2 million poor and low-income people. My name is Michael Pusar, and I count myself amongst those low-income mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. While I am extremely grateful for the job I have and the benefits it provides, I am only just able to get by. I have health issues that require me to purchase more expensive specialty foods, and of course there are medical bills. In the richest nation ever, there's no reason that anyone should not be able to afford to live comfortably and not have to worry about the next emergency that could break us.
That's right.
I am fortunate I have a residence provided to me, but after essentially 17 years, I am still not earning enough to afford housing on my own, especially given that I live in Montgomery County, which has a high cost of living. I am single with no children, but I want to have children, and doing so at my current income doesn't feel possible. My heart goes out to the families with children that are struggling, because there are many. I have been with the Maryland Poor People's Campaign for 5 years, and I am now a tri-chair.
That's right.
I believe in this movement because no one should earn less than necessary, and no child should suffer in Montgomery County or Baltimore or Annapolis or the Eastern Shore. We won't be silent anymore. We won't be muted anymore. Forward together.
Not one step back.
Love to everyone.
Mike,
yes.
I heard you're going to be organized.
Most definitely.
All right, all right.
My name is Janice Wong. I live in Worcester, Massachusetts. I am one of the 1 million poor and low-income eligible voters in my state. Yes, 1 million. I work for Mass Health as a personal care attendant, PCA. I take care of people with disability and who are sick and who need help with their daily activities. But I do not have health insurance myself. I have been called an essential worker. And during the worst of the pandemic in Massachusetts, there are 165,600 without health insurance. Again, 165,600 without health insurance. I am an essential worker, living paycheck to paycheck, and I have to make decisions every day. Do I put gas in my car? Or do I pay my bills? Or do I put food on my table? I am a proud member union of the 1199 SEIU.
That's right.
And we have been organizing and won a pathway towards $25 an hour with a 3-year contract with the state of Massachusetts. Right. Governor Healy says she supports PCAs, but in her new state budget, she is cutting PCAs who work fewer than 10 hours. That means my brothers and sisters who do less 10 hours will be having no job. And those people who need care won't have anybody. This is why I am organizing with the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign. We have got to get our power as people. We're taking back the mic, raising our voices, and registering our voters as the man. Forward together.
Not one step. As you can see, as y'all have your seats, as you can see from all around the country, and this is just a few, we've got 32 states online right now. They're there. Have a seat, y'all. Have a seat, everybody. They're there online all over the country. And now we've got someone from Georgia. Come on in, if she's online. Give Liz her seat.
Hi. How are you, Reverend Barbara? How are you doing?
Hey.
Hey. Hey, y'all. My name is Dan. I'm coming from the state of Georgia. My name is Aandra Armstrong, and I'm a 38-year-old single mom of 2. I have actually been homeless up until 2 years ago with my children. Recently, I have been doing a part-time work and thankfully having a connection with a friend to even get me into that job. I've been applying and applying and applying to have a better job, regardless of going to college, regardless of doing everything the right way. You know, that promise from the counselor that said that even if you go to college for 4 years, I could at least, look to have a middle class wage. And unfortunately, that was not the case for me. It has been 15 years since they have raised the minimum wage taxes. The other day, a few of our friends, mom friends groups, we were at the park and we were talking about finances, of course. And one of the moms said $7.15 an hour. You have to really understand that's really $4.15 an hour, because after they take the taxes, that is what we really have to deal with. It's going straight to childcare, it's going straight to bills, and without financial help from EBT, without financial help from, I'm on Section 8, I'm not quite sure where I would be. So it's time to raise our voices. It's time for us to get out and vote, because this needs to change. Mothers, single mothers, most importantly, we're exhausted. We're exhausted, and we're a little bit embarrassed to have to always ask for help when we want to work and we want to provide for our children. So I say,
we hear you down there in Georgia. So you're going to be mobilizing, right?
Am mobilizing currently. Yes,
that's right.
exactly.
That's right. Already at it. Thank you so much, sister. Veronica, come on up from Wisconsin.
Alrighty, we're short on time. I wish I had more time because I was part of the.
That's all right.
Okay. My name is Veronica Burton. I live in Beloit, Wisconsin, right around the corner from one of the billionaires. I'm a family service worker, sub. Sometime I'm a attendant on a bus. I only get paid for one position. Because of the low wages with no raises, our center staffs are short across the country. Plus, employees use their personal funds to help families in our program and the community. Minimum wage, $7.25. I found out the other day with the babies I have to work 2 hours just to get a gallon of OJ. OJ is $9 now. I call that shrinkflation. Quality and qualities goes up, but the prices comes up. With four small spoon passing during COVID, starting all over again, I pay $1,500 a month for child care. 2 rent increases during COVID. Being a family service worker, the pain and concerns, I am heartbroken with the families that I'm supposed to be helping in the program. And it's shameful that a couple of our kids in there had to unenroll because a mom couldn't pay for asthma. Shame. Heartbreaking. So I'm gonna cut this short. I am not alone. The families I work with also struggle to get health care, child care, and good paying jobs. That's why we are here. I am here. Organized to go to the State House on March 2nd. Families are hurting. I am hurting. Once again, I wish I had more time, but we're hurting here. Mobilize. We are here. One step back.
That's right. Forward together. And so, America, this is real people, real faces, real communities, real states. As long as we have so-called moderates and extremists who will join together and vote to deny 52 million people a living wage of $15 an hour, we must mobilize, we must take back the mic, and we must cast our votes and make change. As long as you can hear these stories, we must mobilize, take back the mic, cast our votes for fundamental change. And people recognize our votes are demands, not just for a party, but for demands. As long as 800 people are dying a day from poverty, nearly 250,000 people a year, we must mobilize. We must take back the mic, and we must cast our votes in a way that is transformative toward a third Reconstruction. As long as the poor are 1/3 of the electorate, 85 million people are poor and or low income. As long as 58 million people in this group cast ballots, making up 34% of the electorate in 2020, we will not be denied. We must mobilize, we must take back the mic, and we must cast our votes. As long as 87 million people are still uninsured or underinsured, we must mobilize, take back the mic, and cast our ballots in a way that is transformative and can shake the foundations and the political plans and poles of this nation. As long as millions of people can't afford, Liz, to pay a doggone energy bill, we must mobilize, take back the mic, and cast our votes in a way that shakes up all the political calculations and demands that we will be heard. We must say to politicians, if you want these votes, start talking to the people and telling them what you're going to do, not in the first 100 days of a new administration, but the first 50 days. Tell them what's going to happen. If, in fact, you have power, this is what power will look like. Here we are in this country, in this moment, in this time, where so many people have cried. We have heard them. All during COVID, they said we got treated as essential workers, but the policies treated us like we were expendable. Essential workers, but we didn't get living wages. Essential workers, but we didn't get paid family leave. 58 senators said no to 52 million people. All Republicans and 2 Democrats said no to restoring voting rights and expanding. We cannot have that. And so folk have decided there are 2 things you can do. You can sit down, not be engaged, and say things are just going to be like that. Or you can do like freedom fighters before us and decide that there comes a time that you can't be silent anymore. This study says it clearly. It's time to wake up the sleeping giant in this nation and flex our power like never before. Are y'all ready? Yeah. Are we going to do this? Yeah. Together. Forward together. Are there any questions from members of the media? Yes. With the who? Thank you. Yeah. The March 2nd is not just a day, it's a launching. We've been organizing and planning since the Moral Poverty Action Congress in June of last year, where we committed ourselves to do 2 things, and 4 things, and one of them was to have these simultaneous gatherings. I want the media to know these are talking about simultaneous, all at the same time, in these 32 states plus the District of Columbia. In a few weeks, delegations of poor and low-wage workers and religious leaders and advocates will go visit both sides of the aisle, the speaker and the majority leaders, the minority leaders on both sides of the aisle, taking these fact sheets and these demands around living wages, around health care, around voting rights. Because so much insurrection, political insurrection is going on right in our state capitals. Then they will come back on March the 2nd for this launching. I want to say this is a launching, not an end. And they will gather together. The key speakers will be poor and low-wage people who represent these powerful voters, many of them who've not voted, but we are committed to touch. And touching 15 million is not even all of them, but we're targeting 15 million infrequent voters, many of them who tended to vote when they did progressive, to say it's time for you to move your power. Then on March the 4th, delegations are going back to those state houses and visit each member of that state assembly. We're saying, because this is a moral issue, nobody is let off the hook. Because the polls tell us that most of the stuff we're demanding, upwards of 70% of Americans want them. So it's not just Democrats or Republicans or black and white. Really, people are focusing on what's right versus what's wrong, what's moral versus what's immoral. And then we will be mobilizing. I won't tell all of the strategy, but we have it down to a formula. Let me just say this. If you organize 200 people in a state who are taught how to deep dive with technology and old-fashioned door knocking and calls, and you get 6,000 people in 30 states, if each one of those persons reaches about 50 people a day in a 5-day week, they can reach upwards of 15 million people in 40 days, 40 to 50 days. We're very serious about this, very serious about this mobilization. It's not just a one-day, one-off, screaming outside and it's over. This is a mobilization. This is a third Reconstruction. This is a resurrection and not an insurrection. This is people deciding that no longer will you discount me. That's what this is. Yes, ma'am. Well, you know, both Liz and I are pastors, and we come out of a tradition that understands that Jesus' first words about evangelicalism and good news was good news to the poor. And the prophets of the Bible were always about mobilizing. And so from the very beginning of the Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival, every coordinating committee has to have a low-wage person as a tri-chair, a religious leader who has a constituency with the tri-chair, and an advocate. What's happening is poor and low wealth people and religious leaders are coming together and saying this is the moral issue of our time. But it can't just be about feeling good. It has to be about transformation. And so congregations, whether they be Jewish, Muslims, or Christians, are coming together with poor and low-wage people and engaging in this mobilization. They're signing up people to be among that 200-300 people that will be trained in how to mobilize. And we're doing this from the center out, from the states up, because it's not about helicopter leadership coming in from on high. It's about building power. And the way we're building it, this power will not just be for this election cycle. It'll be there for years and years and years to come. But more and more people are becoming so tired of the heresy of Christian nationalism and religious nationalism, and are deciding that the prophetic moral voices can no longer stay quiet, stay reserved, stay calm. We must engage. There's a scripture that we use in this movement oftentimes. It's Isaiah chapter 10. It says, "Woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey." It says that, and then there's another scripture in Amos chapter 5 that says, when injustice is like this, it says, God says, I'm looking for a remnant that will shut down the streets and shut down the stores and shut down and will mobilize and will organize and will wail and will say, not now, not on our watch. No, we're not having this. And will mobilize. And then it says, and that remnant can change the country. Change this country. And all over the Bible, there are these stories about valley of dry bones, people rising up, the stones that the builders rejected becoming the chief cornerstone of a new reality. And, you know, Pentecost happening and 12 or 120 people turning around and reaching 1,000. These are all moral political imagery in Scripture that we have to use in this particular moment. And so the time has come. We've tested it before. You heard Attorney Shali Gupta-Bond talk about what had happened in 2016. We have data. This is metric driven. It's not just emotionally driven. That's why we did this report and commissioned this report. And so pastors, clergy, imams, rabbis, people of faith, people not of faith, joining together with poor and low-wage folk, saying that it's time to bend the arc of the moral arc of the universe. It's time to push into this third Reconstruction. We are mobilizing together in every community. And what's so powerful about it is the numbers tell us it's not even a hard lift if we do it together. The margins of victory are so small now, 3%, 2%, 1%, that there's hardly a battleground state in this country where if you mobilize 20% of poor and low-wage voters that didn't vote in the last election, that they couldn't change the outcome. And in some states like Wisconsin and Michigan, it's 1%. Florida is about 4%. And when we tell people this in a room, they light up because they've been told so long, we don't have power. Other folk are so strong. What we're finding out is a lot of people are not so strong, but that we've not flexed our strength, and it's time now to do it. Thank you so much, all of you who have come. Blessings to all of you. Thank you, C-SPAN, for being here, and we'll see you on the front line. Forward together. Forward together. Forward together.
Not one step back.
Not one step back.
Who's that?
Now one step back.
Yeah, we did. We acknowledged all the folk. Y'all heard me when I said there are 31 people up there from all of the states. That's why they're there. They're on no such span. They're hollering back. All our tri-chairs from all around. There they are.
One step back.
Say it. All right. See you all on the front line.
Now one step on the front line.
That's right.
Now one step back.
Somebody said it.
Front line.
Remember, all mics are still hot.
We won't be silent anymore. Forward together. Not one step back.